Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And we're taking a sabbatical from this show, so this is the last time you'll hear from us until right after this. There we go, the world's shortest sabbatical.
That was something.
7 or 8 seconds, something like that?
Yeah, that was something. That was, that was something.
So, but we are going to talk about sabbaticals today.
We are.
It is something that, honestly, I haven't really thought of in the context of being an agency owner before, but it's something that a client of mine came to me with and asked about the idea of potentially taking a sabbatical in the coming years. And I said, well, that's an interesting thought. Let me dig into that and think about how it might work. And so you and I happened to be talking, and you mentioned that you knew some agency owners who had done just that. So why not? I mean, this is an interesting topic for conversation. I think after the last year or so, lots of people have thought about just saying, okay, I need a break.
Right.
I need a break.
Right.
And so, let's talk about how that might work for an agency.
So I have a couple of questions. Is this agency owner, is it a boutique small agency? Is it?
Yeah, I would describe it as a micro agency.
Okay, so just a handful of employees.
Mm-hmm.
Is this person the lead on most things? Client service, business development, all of that?
Well, that's actually something we've been working on already to try to move this individual away from day-to-day, because as you and I talk about on this show all the time, it's important for owners to extract themselves from being the account lead. And so this agency has made some good progress on that front in getting team members to really be the day-to-day point person with clients. So that's in the pro column here. I think it's being set up well for that already. But that's obviously critical. If you're going to be taking, I mean, frankly, if you're going to be taking, 2 or 3 weeks off from your agency, you need to find some way to have other people managing that work and servicing clients in that interim period.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept because there are plenty of women who run agencies and have babies and don't take maternity leave. Like most of us don't get the normal, 6 weeks to however long, 90 days if you're in the US. If you're in Canada, you get much longer, but we don't even take that time off because we can't afford it, or the business isn't set up for it, or maybe we don't want to, or whatever it happens to be. But I think even just the idea of taking maternity leave, it's not a sabbatical, but it's taking time away from your business. So how do you create something so that you can take the time off? If it's 6 weeks for maternity leave, or even a month or 2 weeks, or is it 6 months or a year? Like I have a friend who took a year off from his business, from his agency. So I think it's an interesting thing to start to think about but it's not something you can just do, right? You have to actually plan for it.
Right. Yeah. It absolutely requires planning. And as regular listeners know, I have a difficult time taking time off myself, not because I feel like I'm so critical to anything or ever have been, but more so because it's not my style. I like to work. It's what I enjoy doing. I mean, when we had our first child, I took half a day, and with the second one, because it was a scheduled C-section, we basically did it on my lunch break, and I was literally back in the office that afternoon.
Oh, that's nice. I bet Jen appreciates that.
Well, look, here's the thing, and I actually give this advice to new fathers all the time. In those early days when they're in the hospital,
there's nothing
other
you can
stuff,
do. Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
You can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so, torturing yourself don't do that. Keep yourself, rested and in a good frame of mind, because there's going to come a period of time, either a few days or a few weeks, depending on whether you've got family staying, because obviously a lot of times family comes and stays and helps out. And I'm like, let them do that, because then it's going to hit you, and you're really going to have to step in and help later on down the road. So that's
I think that's really good advice, actually.
Yeah, because if you front load it, and I know that particularly new fathers have that instinct. Let's let me take the time off right up front. And I say, no, try to, do what you have to do in those early days, but really plan on taking the more extended period of time off 2 or 3 weeks in when family evaporates, goes home, and mom needs a lot more help.
Yeah. So when you, and I think this goes for either men and women. Well, it goes for every binary people as well. It goes for everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to work on my pronouns. You have to really think about what it is that you're going to do. And I think what you said in terms of, making sure that you're not the lead on client service. Do you have somebody on the team who can help with business development, even if it's, in the interim, just following up on leads, not necessarily being proactive? Do you have a second in command? That was always really important to me, is having a second in command, so that even if I took a week off, I knew that things were handled and I wasn't going to get panicked emails or text messages or phone calls because it was just handled. So all of those things, I think, lead up to it for sure. But I think you have to have those things in place to be able to take any extended time off.
Right. Well, I mean, the reality is a lot of the steps that you should be taking in your business anyway are things that will help you if you want to take a sabbatical. They will help you if you just want to take a month off in the summer. Right. In the future when you can travel somewhere, whatever. Right.
Well, even if you don't, even if you just want to have a staycation, or you want to work on a side hustle, or you want to write a book, or whatever it happens to be.
Right. I mean, and it also is the same stuff that will help you when you want to sell your business, right? Because all of those same steps of putting in structure, putting in process, not making the agency depend on you as the owner, those are all, so these are steps that you should be taking anyway, but certainly if you're planning to take an extended period of time away from the business, you really need to make sure that you've got those all under control. Although, of course, the difference is in those cases, even if you're taking, say, a 6-month sabbatical, you are still theoretically reachable in an absolute emergency. Right. And I would generally advise that, keep your phone on. If whoever you've put in charge has something that they absolutely positively can't handle. It should be like a once every 6 months kind of conversation. It shouldn't be a once every 6 hours conversation. But you are still, I mean, even when you take a sabbatical from your business, you are still typically the chair of the board, right? Because you are the owner of the business. And if there are no other owners, someone still has to play that ownership role, even if you're on a sabbatical. And so there may be things that you still have to make an occasional decision on. So, I think you have to be realistic about that as you go into it, because, you would never be the chair of any company or own 100% of any company and just completely ignore it for 6, 9, 12 months. No,
I think that many of us go into business for ourselves for the reasons that you have said, like you continue to work. It's not your style not to work. Those kinds of, like, I can't imagine, even if I took a sabbatical, to say, okay, I'm not going to be working on the business. I'm not going to be working with clients. You're going to be doing this. I'm going to work on this project, whatever it happens to be. I'm going to write a book. Whatever it happens to be. I feel like I'd still be checking email and checking in. And, I don't think it would be completely off the table. And I don't know, I personally don't know anyone who's taken a sabbatical from any job, even in university, academia, that hasn't done at least that. Check in, once a day or once a week or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that can be helpful there, because email can be a giant black hole, right?
It can, for sure.
So I'm with you that you need to be paying attention to some of it. My advice would be something that I've seen, frankly, other people do even just for, a 1 week vacation, which is set up a separate email account. And so, so the people who absolutely need to reach you know that they can use this private email address to get things to you. So maybe that's your lawyer, your accountant, your second in command, whoever absolutely might need to reach you should have a private email address and probably a phone number to reach you if absolutely necessary. But I would encourage you to try to avoid checking your main account. In fact, I know one venture capitalist who has an email account that he uses for vacations, which is something like, I really need to interrupt Brad at. I forget exactly what it is, but it's one of those things. It's one of those things where, as you are typing it in order to send the email, you realize, okay, this better be important.
It better be good. I like it.
So I like something like that as your buffer, so that you don't get sucked into the, oh, I'm in here because, I know my accountant sent me, the quarterly report. I need to go take a look at it.
Right.
Oh, while I'm in there, I just saw this. I can't help myself. I need to respond to this. Or I need to tell the team how to respond to it or whatever. So I think finding ways to segregate that is important. I think that, you do want to be reachable by phone in an emergency, but really your second in command should be about the only person who has that. I would not give that to clients, right? The clients should know that in an emergency, your second in command could reach you, right? Because they are viewing it as your business still if you're a small agency, but it shouldn't be that they have the ability to reach out directly. And the expectations need to be clearly set up front with everybody, clients, vendors, employees, contractors, whomever, that your availability is very close to zero. Not quite zero, but very close to it.
So you said something earlier, which was, and I think this is a really great point, which was if you're setting yourself up to take any extended time off, it's just like you're setting the business up to be sold. And I sit on the board of a startup where we just started their third year in January, and we are now looking at adding additional offices outside of Chicago. And one of the things that we're helping them sort of plan out is, what does that look like? Where do we go? What's the environment like? All those competitive analysis, all that kind of stuff. But who do we have, or who do we know that can lead that office? So it's the same kind of mentality, in that even if you're not opening a second or third or multiple offices, maybe you have an employee in a different location to service clients there, or like we do, we've been virtual since 2011. And so I'll hire people wherever they are, just based on the expertise that we need. We don't need them in Chicago. So I always think about who's the best person for that, and how do we hire for that role, so that in some cases the clients there don't even know. I mean, they know who I am, but they don't know me personally because I'm not doing the work. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, is how am I setting this structure up, or this foundation up, so that if I sell it someday, or I take an extended leave, or I'm caretaking for my parents, or there's a global pandemic and I have to teach second grade, or my spouse gets sick, whatever it happens to be, there's all these different scenarios where you may have to take time off. Maybe you have to have surgery and you're out for 2 months, whatever it happens to be. Create the foundation now so that you have the ability to be able to do that later.
Right. And that means, everybody needs to understand who takes over if you disappear, right? Because I'm also a big believer in, you need to have your hit by a bus plan.
Yep.
Because the things we've been talking about are things where, even though there's not really a choice, the owner is still available.
Right.
But there's always the potential that, you could get hit by a bus. And then what happens? And so one of the things that I've seen in small businesses, in small agencies, is that the owner has kept things so close and hasn't shared enough information that it becomes very difficult for someone to even act as a caretaker. So, I mean, let's say that you are, disabled for a period of time, a month or two, and you can't, for whatever reason, you probably want the business to keep running so that you have something to come back to in that scenario. But so that means that someone has to have access to the business bank account. Someone has to have all of the appropriate permissions and passwords. And I know that that's a tough thing for most small business owners to understand. They need to give out and be comfortable with it, but you have to do it. Because I mean, I know that that if I got hit by a bus and I'm sitting in a hospital room, I want someone to be able to pay those bills for me.
Right. Yeah.
Keep the lights on.
Yes, please.
So you want to make sure that you've got those things in place, and it may be that even you don't give it necessarily out, but you've got literally an envelope. I mean, when I first started my first business, back 20 some years ago, I literally had an envelope in my desk that said "hit by a bus." It was sealed, and it had in there all of the passcodes for anything sensitive like bank accounts and such, so that if the worst happened, someone could still step in and take the necessary steps.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. I mean, I use Lastpass, but I have my master password hidden
Mm-hmm.
away in the safe. So, if something happens, all you have to do is open my computer and put in my master password, and you can get into the bank account and all that and QuickBooks and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and LastPass actually has a great functionality in that regard where you can designate someone.
Yep.
And so they can, they don't even have to find your safe, right? They can simply say, that this is the account that I want access to. It sends an email to you. And if you don't respond in, I don't know, it's a week or two or something like that, then it's presumed that it's because you're incapacitated and they then get access. So you can designate someone to have that level of access to your account.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Yeah.
And some of the social media accounts have that now as well. Facebook, I know, has that ability so that you can designate effectively an heir to your Facebook account.
Yep.
Which is, I think, a good thing these days.
Morbid, but good.
Morbid, but good. And this is a sidetrack, but it still gets to me when someone who is deceased, there are people going on their page.
I know!
Hope you have a great birthday.
And you're like, oh my gosh, they're dead.
Yeah. I have a friend who's been dead probably for 8 years now, and he still gets posts on his Facebook page every year. Oh, we need to grab a drink soon.
Not happening.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Unless
I'm sorry
you're going to the
you.
afterlife as well. It's not happening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's one of the creepy things about social media.
Yeah, I agree.
But so you need to be planning. You need to have these steps in place. I think one of the most important is what we've touched on is having. If you don't already have a second in command, you will as soon as you take the sabbatical, because someone has to be primarily responsible for the business. You certainly don't want a situation where it's management by committee. That never works anywhere. You need to designate a first among equals at the very least, who is who breaks a tie or figures out what needs to be done or those kinds of things. You need to think about who that is, particularly if it's not clear to you already, because it needs to be someone that you trust, but also has the faith of the team.
Yep.
And we all know that there are personality clashes that happen and things like that, and so it doesn't mean that you can't put someone as that interim leader who may have a conflict with some other member of the team, or that maybe they're not necessarily a conflict even, but just that they don't always see eye to eye. But you need to make sure that you figure out how to address that and lay the groundwork. If you've got two people who are potentially in that role, you're going to pick one. The other one may feel a little bent out of shape that they weren't picked. So you need to think that through. And how do you, again, all of the communication that goes into this is really critical, because you don't want anything to put it off the rails, because there's already enough risk in doing something like this that you don't want to unnecessarily add to it.
Yeah, I just think, even if it's not something that if you're not thinking about an extended sabbatical, I do think it's important and we've talked about this in other episodes as well, but really think about what that foundation is. For me, my accountant, who's external, doesn't have access to removing money from the bank account, but he can pay bills and do all that kind of stuff. And then he is on the emergency list if
that's removing money from the account, right? Because he can't just write a check.
It has to go through there's an approval process that we have that he can't yet. I actually had that happen to me where the accountant was writing himself checks.
Unfortunately, a lot of agencies have had that, even big ones. MWW had an experience, and I forget, and actually it was the same individual at MWW and somewhere else where that happened, where the individual, even in large agencies with all sorts of controls, he was able to pocket all sorts of money. Fortunately, they caught him and prosecuted him, but it can happen, so you do need to keep an eye on it.
I have a friend who has petty cash, and for 20 years, her assistant was taking money out of petty cash and setting it aside, and she bought herself a house before they caught her. 20 years. And the best part about it is, my friend probably would have bought her the house had she asked. She's that kind of person, right? But yeah. Right. Anyway,
but don't let those horror stories scare you off from doing it, because you still need to do it. It just means you have to have proper checks and balances and controls in place. But you absolutely need to have other people involved in your finance process beyond just you.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing I like about having my accountant do it is, and because he's external, is he has no emotion tied up in it. So when I say my family gets this, my employees get this, he can separate that all. Where I used to have my bookkeeper who's on staff handling that, and there was emotion tied up into it. She was like, well, why don't I get this, and why don't? And that relationship ended up ending in the long run. But I like that because he has no emotion. He has no emotion in it. He's just like, okay, this is what it's sort of like the attorney in the will. Like, this is just what they wanted. Then my assistant, she has access to pretty much everything except the bank account. So she could she could keep things running, everything, make sure invoicing is still going out and all that kind of stuff. And then my second in command is in charge of the clients. And then I have one person who's our director of sales who's in charge of business development. But he's been in charge of that for 2 years. So even though I'm the closer, so to speak, he's still the one doing all that kind of stuff. So it would be a little more difficult, I think, if I weren't here because he's not the closer, but at least they could keep the agency running at a level to be able to continue to make payroll and they may not grow, but it would be sustainable.
Right. Well, and I think you've touched on it. Probably the toughest thing with the owner stepping away for an extended period of time is going to be business development, because in most small agencies, the owner is either the sole or at least the primary rainmaker. And so even to the extent that you've got a process and you've got other team members involved, it's likely that your business development efforts will take some sort of a hit. And so you, again, in the things that you need to plan for, you need to plan for that possibility. If you assume that you're going to, continue on the same growth trajectory while you're out of the picture, that may not be reasonable.
Right.
It depends on how you've got things set up and all that, but it may not be reasonable. And you also have to keep in mind that, if you're taking, let's say for argument's sake, a 6-month sabbatical, that your actual pause on business development is going to be longer than that.
Right.
Right. Because there will be a period of time leading up to that where it will ebb off and should ebb off.
Yep.
And then there's going to be a period of time where it takes to ramp it up because your pipeline doesn't just magically reappear overnight.
Right.
And so one of the things that you need to figure out is, is your sabbatical 100%? Or are you still going to continue to do some level of networking and those kinds of things that will keep you out there so that you can, generate that business? Will you still have conversations where you can maybe not work on the actual pitch and proposal and all that, but you make the initial connection and you pass it off? So there's degrees of all of this, and it depends on how you want to structure it. You can structure it however you want. You just need to plan for it and understand what that impact is.
Right. Very right. I think the moral of the story is it can be done. You can certainly take the time off. Sometimes it'll be forced. Sometimes it will be voluntary. But if you plan for it and you build the foundation correctly, not only can you do those things, but eventually you'll be able to sell the business, or it will be, you can do an ESOP, however, as you think about, 20, 30, 40 years from now, what the business looks like as you exit, you'll have built that foundation for that as well.
Right. And I think as our parting portion of this, we're communicators. And so one of the key questions to me is, how do you communicate that you're doing this, right? I mean, there are certain times where if you're taking time off because it's to take care of a sick relative, or because you've had a baby, or because you're sick yourself, those are relatively straightforward to communicate. Most people are, immediately understanding of those kinds of scenarios. But when it's voluntary, when you're simply saying, I'm going to take a sabbatical and step away from the business, how do you communicate that so that you continue to maintain the confidence of your team and your clients? And so I'm curious, in the cases where you've seen people step away, how have they handled that? Because I think, as communicators, we often forget our own communications, but this is a place where it's really important.
This is a crappy answer, but it's our tagline. It depends, right? It depends on how involved you are in the business and how involved you are with clients. I have one client who would be like, you're doing what? Wait, what am I going to do? And only one. Right. And I would start preparing him for that several months in advance. He also would not understand it. He'd be like, well, I don't understand why you can't do that and run the business. He just wouldn't get it. So I would start preparing him in advance. But because I've built the foundation where, I'm working on the business and I'm growing the business and I'm building the vision and doing all those things, but I'm not critical to the day-to-day execution. So I've done everything that we've talked about here. I might get hit by a car while I'm riding my bike. I once had a really bad accident and I was in the hospital for 5 days. Right? You just don't know. And so I have built the foundation for that. So communicating it, I think, is a little bit easier from that perspective. But if you're in it day to day, it's going to be a lot harder. I have a friend who runs a web design firm here, and they have 45 maybe employees, 50 employees. And he started preparing for the time off at least 6 months in advance. They were having meetings, they were creating, expectations on all that. And I bet it took him probably 6 to 8 months to prepare to leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's realistic, because you have to make sure you've got all of these systems in place, and that you've thought through, what are the things that are going to need to be handled in that time period, so that you can set it up so that you're not being constantly interrupted with emergencies, because they were simply things that you could have foreseen but you didn't. And so you want to foresee as much as possible and get it all laid out so that everybody has a clear understanding. And I think with communications, you're absolutely right that if you are not involved with clients, it becomes a whole lot easier, right? Yeah. Because essentially 6 months later you pop back up and they're like, "Oh, you were gone? We
didn't even know." I mean, which is
that's
great.
The ideal, right? And I know we have a lot of solos or super solos who are listening to us. You're in a much more difficult position.
Much more difficult.
In my business, I can't take a sabbatical right now from this business because
there isn't.
Understandably, clients would not want to pay for coaching from nobody.
From nobody.
Right? And it would be unreasonable for me to expect that, right? So I can't go to Europe for a month if I want to right now without working, because nobody's going to pay me for nothing. It doesn't work that way. Right. So you have to be realistic about it, and you have to figure out what's going to work in your situation. So I guess that brings us to the end, which will allow us to give that sum up advice, which you've already mentioned. But I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And it depends. Thank you for listening to the Agency Leadership Podcast. You can watch or listen to every episode by visiting agencyleadershippodcast.com or subscribing on your favorite podcast player. We would also love it if you would leave a rating or review at iTunes or wherever you go to find podcasts. Be sure to check out Gini Dietrich at spinsucks.com and join the SpinSucks community at spinsucks.com/spin-sucks-community. You can learn more about me, Chip Griffin, at small-agency-growth.com, where you can also sign up for a free community membership to engage with other agency leaders. The Agency Leadership Podcast is distributed on the FIR Podcast Network, where you can find lots of other communications-oriented podcasts. Just visit www.firpodcastnetwork.com. We welcome your feedback and suggestions and look forward to being back with you again next week.